Well, Caesar, welcome to the podcast. I'm glad we can make this happen. Thank you for making time for us. For our
Thanks
viewers
for
and
having
listeners,
me.
yeah, absolutely, man. For our viewers and listeners, could you give us a little intro about you and what you do?
Well, I like to say I'm a disciple maker. I've done professionally, vocationally. I'm an author and a coach. And my wife and I coach together, and we coach people in how to create a lifestyle of discipleship
Mm,
with their families and throughout their churches or with youth groups or however that would be. But instead of discipleship as, like I said, a classes or a program to set up, well, what if it's everyday life? What if it fits into all of life? And then there's no rub up against like, well, I don't have time for that. You do if it fits into your normal life.
right. Yeah.
And so, yeah, my background is in many things. My wife and I are serial entrepreneurs, so we've owned and started a whole lot of businesses, over 25, believe it or not, and a serial church planter. So, but we
Okay.
started out in youth ministry, like so many church planters do.
Yeah. Very cool, man. I love that. Yeah, I love that. I love seeing how people who start in youth ministry or at some point get in youth ministry, where they end up going, and then how they can even harken back to like, man, it'd be good for teenagers or parents or youth workers to know this, or if I had known this. And yeah, I think that's what learning and discipleship and sanctification and all that kind of stuff and being the community and being the church is all about. So I'm really glad that you guys get to do that. And I'm glad
Yeah.
that our listeners and viewers get to partake of your wisdom and experience. Today, we're talking about something that we really haven't talked about on the podcast before, and we're going to get into the bones of it first. But really, it's kind of the idea of building faith communities, maybe outside of the traditional spectrum of what we consider like for the church and our programming, and for students like Sunday morning or Sunday night or Wednesday night. And a lot of that starts with um, the parents and how they raise their kids and disciple them, and then how youth workers are able to help the parents and the students be able to reinforce that with discipleship, and thinking about how can we go out into the world, find encouragement, find people to walk with us, find people that we can walk with. Yeah, so it starts with kind of the idea of like out in the neighborhood or out where we live, but there are things to think about before getting to that point, because not all students have their parents super involved. Not all youth groups are the same size. There are some listening who might be running their youth ministry for their church as a volunteer in a rural setting. So there's a lot of different contexts to consider. But when we
For
start to think
sure.
about bridging outside of the traditional structure of whoever's listening has for their students, what are some first steps to think about as we start to think about building faith communities wherever we're at?
Years ago, as we were sort of doing, I guess, maybe what it now seems like quite a traditional youth ministry. I call it the pizza do youth ministries.
Yeah,
Lots of
that's right.
pizza and Mountain Dew.
Yeah,
A
amen.
lot of rah-rah, get the sports section, and then, all right, let's get seated. And you got a little message maybe, and all that, right?
Mhm.
We just realized that wasn't connecting families and necessarily their outside of the church friends very well. Kids
Got
are
it.
like middle schoolers, they don't know what's going on in life. High schoolers are like very self-focused, and now with social media, it's even worse. That's just their whole life, and if it doesn't look good there, it doesn't look good anywhere.
Yep.
And so we started trying to say, hey, this idea of living in a missional community, which is how we live in a community as a family on mission with our kids who are now raised in, but their friends and our friends and neighbors and all like that, making disciples that way. We said, well, what would be the version of that would incorporate the youth getting to experience life as a family on mission?
Mm.
And it might be localized to like friends that are really, really close. Generally, people like to start out by gathering up with people they like and they know. There's a sort of a fear, a selfishness, and a consumeristic aspect of that, because probably they go to a church that says, oh, well, we have small groups. Here's the days. Sign up when it makes sense to you. So it's not based on mission. It's not based on proximity or who we're trying to disciple or reach. It's really based on me, myself, my schedule, who I like, age and stage of life, all that.
Mhm.
So some of that creeps in and some of that we inherit. That's just the way it goes. But the thing behind the thing, because when you think about, well, I want to start doing this with my youth. And then I'm guessing that, a lot of youth, like you were just kind of alluding to, a lot of youth pastors are thinking, Well, are the kids organizing these communities? No, they're not gonna. And well, the parents need to live this way, but ours don't, because that's not even part of our church thing. So the thing behind the thing to get to this level, and it's powerful. I'm telling you, it is the most powerful youth ministry we've ever done, and there's no looking back. That's how we do it now. But the thing behind the thing is a couple things. One is the youth, I think pastors or staff, paid or not, whatever, they really need to see their job is not parenting by proxy or discipling the kids by proxy. I want to challenge us all to say, what if our job was to say, hey, instead of, like we're always trying to get more adults involved, so the ratio of parents to kids is way higher, we'll get some college kids, we're just trying to get some warm bodies, adults involved in these kids' life. We used to joke and say, hey, we got a plan that gets us to this crazy ratio of almost like 1-to-1 adult to kid, or 2-to-1 even. It's called parents, involved. And so instead of thinking we're going to like bifurcate, separate the kids out over here, silo them, what if our job was really to disciple the parents on how to make disciples, make their homes an attractive place for their students, how to help their students love their friends, where it's not, well, it's weird or awkward, but really help disciple the parents in a way that they can actually come along and help their kids disciple their friends as well.
Hmm.
I think that's the primary job. Now, that's a shift, I know, but we've helped so many, with our coaching and resources, we've helped so many people begin to move that way. They say, well, the church still expects me to do the Wednesday night pizza do thing. We're doing it. It's fun. We're doing it. However, we're also parallel to that, starting to equip and disciple the parents and start, small to move big, start doing some stuff in the homes as well with their friends
Mm-hmm.
and all.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the second big thing behind the thing is identity. If in our family, if in our church, and then in our families, and then in the minds of the kids, they just see Christianity as sort of a decision they made about their afterlife, basically. Like I don't want to go to hell. I want to get my ticket punched. But now what I'm really worried about is not God and his glory and growing and becoming more Christ. Like I'm primarily worried about how the world sees me. And so does my folks, my family, though we love church, we're kind of waiting for heaven, and it's behavioral modification. Try to sin less till then. If we start to see ourselves in our true identity, creating God's image, he's triune, God's our father, that makes us all brothers and sisters, family, like we really are a family. Okay. And Jesus is a servant, so we're servants. And he says, as I was sent, so I send you. That makes us missionaries, because sent ones are missionaries. It's not a locational thing,
Mm-hmm.
really, missionary.
Mm-hmm.
It's identity thing. If we can start to help the parents and the kids, so maybe at the pizza do thing, we're really working on identity and the implications of living like a family. If they can start to see themselves that way, and those students, their friends, especially maybe the EGRs, the extra grace requires, that's like a sibling of yours. That's your brother. I know you don't get along with your own brother, but like that has to seed it. So why we'd want to open up our home to these students and start to have fun and have them treat those other students like family, and our kids are treating them like family, and the other parents like older brothers and sisters, aunts and uncles. Unless that identity drops, this becomes sort of pragmatic. Well, it's a good idea, it's like a new program the church is trying,
Right. Right.
and that's tough sledding. That's tough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I love that, man. A lot of things you said reminded me of some elements of my own youth group experience, and even some things that my own youth pastors were thinking of at that point that kind of leaned toward this direction. So, like I remember in high school when we made the shift to, you know, in junior high and everything, my youth group, at least 250, 300 kids show up on a Wednesday night, really big deal. And then
Lots of pizza, Mountain Dew.
lots of pizza. Yeah. Oh, you know it, man. Lots of
Pizza
energy,
do.
all that stuff.
Now
And
settle down, we're going to talk about something serious.
yeah, settle down with all that sugar and everything in your system. And we moved it to in homes on Wednesday night based on where you went to school. So if you went to high school in this area of the town, you would meet at this home. Everybody. If you
Okay,
went
so
to,
at least there's some proximity there.
yeah,
That's
so
cool.
there's some proximity, and so it'd be in a home of a leader or a youth family, and we had a student leadership team as well. So it wasn't just like, well, it's the pizza do thing in someone's house and adults are leading it. No, there are students and peers greeting and running the games and even doing like a devotional, everything else. And the adults are kind of just hanging out and letting the peers kind of drive the connection. And, for a big SBC church in the early aughts, that was a very big shift.
Yeah.
And there was a lot of good that came out of that. And once a month, we would meet back at the church, kind of like a big rally, like a big, hey, how's everyone doing? Check in.
Yeah.
Everyone's great. All right. 3 more weeks of in homes. Um, and I really enjoyed it. And it gave me, as a student leader, a lot of opportunity and a lot of intimate opportunities and engagements and conversations and really hands-on learning experiences that trumped the summer internship at my home church I had after I graduated high school. Like those 1 or 2 school years of being on the student leadership team, I feel like surpassed a lot of what I get to do as the summer intern at a big youth group and big church and running
Yeah, I
around and
bet.
doing whatever. And I remember telling my youth pastor at that time, like, I think this is going to be a great idea. And I really thrived and enjoyed that different season of youth ministry in the school year. And it led to a lot more invitations of friends from school. And it was a more comfortable, like, okay, trying the church thing out, but just going to someone's house and playing some games and getting some food and hearing someone talk about, if you have questions about the Bible, like here's some answers for you. And it was a really fun experiment. And I think what you're talking about, and obviously what you've seen practiced out all the way, is a cool direction that maybe some people listening have tried or done what my youth group did. And that's maybe as far as they've gotten. So I think people listening are like, what that is sounds great. And we've tried something like that, but it seems kind of scary, probably for some, like you alluded to, kind of going all the way and saying, here's it.
Yeah. There's a real intentionality to what happens there. We're not just trying to export the same kinds of things from the church building to homes and somehow
Yeah.
it's magically better.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We see that going on right now. Oh, micro church, or house church or whatever, all those terms that used to be bad. Now they're all in vogue since COVID, like, well, so what do you do at your micro church? Well, we still get together on Sundays and we do all the same stuff we did at the big church. It's like, oh, that's not what a missional community is. And so, like, for us, there is and there was real intentionality of like what's happening when we are getting together. So there's always food because that's what a family does. So think through the lens of family.
Mm-hmm.
There's always food. We're getting to know each other's stories real intentionally. Hey, let's tell each other a story tonight. So and so and so and so's up. You know what I mean? And you're
Yeah.
listening for what's going on in their heart, and maybe you've even given them a little bit of a form to like help guide your question because you're looking for their identity. Where do they find their value? So there's some intentionality in that. Another big thing, huge thing, is we teach the story of God, and we teach it narratively and dialogically. So it's this series of little short narratives that chronologically through the whole Bible with dialogue that is all about discovery, and it goes deep. Now, by the way, we do this with adults too, and it's mind blowing. Like, Christians don't really know the Bible. Our kids
Yeah.
really don't. When we started doing story with the youth, oh, it changed everything, because not only did they start to get the overarching arc of who God is and who he created them to be, that's identity, but also who the church really is and how we get to live. It started to move that. And because it's oral, those kids knew those stories. It was crazy. Like we would do review weeks. Hey, let's catch up. Who remembers this story? Could anybody want to stand up and tell it? They would tell it like almost word for word. Freaky, right? We also, because we're exercising our identity as servants, we would organize times. Hey, in 2 Saturdays from now, we're going out and we're serving together. I hooked up this thing we're going to do at the park, or we're going over to so-and-so's house and we're raking all their leaves up,
Yeah.
and then we're
Yeah.
going to so-and-so's and raking up leaves, and they're going to have lunch there for us. That's what a family would do, and then next week, we're going to talk about how that went. How did you guys like serving each other? Was it weird? Like, did you feel good? Jesus is a servant, right? And we live in his identity. We were very intentional about the fun and the learning to seed in identity. Now, the parents are right there too, right? So they're kind of getting discipled along the way,
Mm-hmm.
and it also helped to partner maybe a couple who is a little more maybe further along in missional living with each parent host kind of home. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
they're not like, oh,
Yeah.
I don't know, like, what do you want us to put out? Just tell us what you know. No, we're trying to disciple you into some new rhythms. And by the way, we'd love you to start having a family dinner night each week that's meaningful. And we're going to even help you with that, because that is going to start to bleed into, hey, we do this. And then when the youth are over, or my friends are over, or when my friends just come over for dinner and it's not anything to do with church, it feels more like family and there's some intentionality. It's full of grace and it's fun. Our house, by God's grace, was always the place the kids wanted to come and hang. And it wasn't because it was the nicest house. We didn't have a pool, no pool tables or ping pong. We didn't, we're not rich, we just didn't have that stuff. But we had a lot of fun, and there was always grace, and we did things, with our kids, and their friends got to do all that with us. And it got to a point where kids were like, how do I want to come to your family dinner. I want to come to your family dinner. Like, you get to, your family. Yes. And I would call them like brother and sister, hey, little brother, what's going on? Like, what's happening, and we would build trust and make a big deal out of their birthdays, because that's what family does.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, man. I love that.
So it's not hard, but it's very intentional.
Yeah. It's very intentional, very different. It gets your families in your ministry and the parents living differently, different rhythms. Yeah, rhythms is it's its own topic that entire podcast series could go on, because
I
I
want to
think
tell you about them, but there's 6 of them and we won't have time today.
yeah,
But
yeah.
there's 6 key rhythms. We call them the discipleship rhythms that God has created the world with.
Hmm.
And Adam and Eve lived in them, and Israel lived in them, and Jesus and his disciples did, and you and I do, and all your students and their parents and all their friends live with these 6 rhythms, and they're already engaged in them.
Mm.
So when you say, oh, I don't have time for all this, well, you do, because you're already doing them all, and so is everybody
Yeah,
else. But it's a new intentionality, and we can go deep into that. Maybe we can do another episode.
yeah, I would love to do that.
Those are
I
the handles. So what do you do? Like,
Yeah,
that stuff you're already doing pretty well.
yeah, yeah. I think someone vocationally in my role, both when I was the youth guy and now someone who oversees the youth program and the children's program, and the staff that runs them. Parent resources is a really big deal. That I think, I think with resources, I think a lot of it's focused for the majority of the time, since it's been like a really in thing, on content. What kind of content is it? How relatable is it? And I'm sure it's been more of a pickup lately, besides just me. There's no way I think like I'm the only one or the center of this original thought. I don't think it is. But I think the biggest thing that you touched on with what you just said of like, well, we don't have time for that, or I'm not involved in that. It's about rhythms. And in a world where you have kindergartners on traveling sports teams, and you have all these other clubs and schools and just a lot of other things going on, you could have the best content and the most winsomely crafted way that you could do it and say, here you go, family. And because they can't find time in their normal rhythms they have to meet or do whatever, that'll just sit there and collect dust or sit in their inbox as unread and not be touched. And so
Yeah.
something that I've tried to think through the last several years is, how do we make um, good resources, but then make it versatile to where it matches the rhythms, and try and then move the focus to the rhythms of that the families are doing, to
Yeah.
where if it's on your way to soccer practice, if it's in the car doing this, or when you have a few minutes here as a family, when after your Sunday morning nap or Sunday afternoon nap, after you're busy and so tired after Sunday morning, what are your rhythms as a family doing this, and how can the church make resources to help you utilize that, instead of like, okay, we have to carve out half an hour and sit here in the floor in the living room and do this, like,
And look at this thing. Yeah.
yeah. So if that's not realistic, where can we have resources that help you meet you where you're at, and then work on rhythms and start to focus on that? That's kind of been my own
Well, and
like
back to the thing behind the thing,
mentality. Yeah.
because if they don't have a gospel heart level shift and start to live out of their identity more,
Yeah.
and like what you just said perfectly, everything that you give them, doesn't matter how cool it is, how perfectly built, crafted it is, it will just seem like another addition. And truly, discipleship has to move from seeing it as something additional to something intentional in our lives.
Mm.
But that takes a heart shift first. I'll give you an example, not from a youth group, but like you'll get it.
Okay.
Not too long ago, my wife and I were living in Manhattan, like right Upper West Side, block from Central Park, and we were there to train a whole lot of people, hundreds of leaders in a denomination there, on how to live this way and form these types of communities. Okay, young and old. They said it's never going to work here. Everybody's way too busy, and like Manhattan, like, and so, but it did. It worked gangbusters. But our missional community ended up being like school administrator, high up, you know what I mean? Hedge fund manager, lots of lawyers, doctors, that kind of stuff. They were busy, man. 80, 90 hours. Like most people don't work that hard. They do. So at first they have no time for anything. But as the gospel began to transform their heart and their love for people, and their understanding that God was pleased with them regardless, and that their identity didn't flow from their career, and that these rhythms they already lived in, all of a sudden they started choosing different priorities. So instead of things like, well, I can't get off of work because, it's just my boss, or that, like, are you sure? Who are you trusting in? Who's more glorious to you, your boss or your heavenly Father, who loves you, in fact, sent your brother Jesus to die for you. Over time, they began to trust God and say, I talked to my boss at the law firm, whose last name is Goldman. You might just guess what, nationality is. They're all Jewish. Nobody works on Saturdays except for like the three of us that aren't, Jewish. So I just said, hey, I'm not going to work Saturdays anymore unless there's some big case going on. They're like, yeah, no kidding, no problem. Bing, you know what I mean? But before they were, because their identity was attached, they wanted to be the flag waver and hero. But when they, started trusting God, you know what I mean? And I remember some of them saying, why do you always call me brother? Or why do you say, hey, welcome family, what's going on this week? Well, because we are. And so it took a long time, but when our identity starts to shift and we start to believe what God says is true of us, and we start to like grow in our spiritual freedom, we're not trying to appease God or make him happy through our choices or build our own identity through what we do, man, life gets easy and fun. And it's exactly the same in our family lives, right? Like treat your kids that way, live in freedom. And we watched everybody start to change their priorities to where they were going like, hey, I'm loving all this, but I got a whole bunch of people that this is leaking onto, friends, family, my sister, work, friends. They're not really ready for a lot of what we're talking about over here. But remember when we first started getting together, it was just a meal and all that. Can we pick another night and just start doing that fun meal, family dinner kind of thing here again? So we have a place for them to sort of, ease into this life with us. You get to. Yeah, we will. Who wants to do that? Not everybody could, but a whole bunch wanted to. Couldn't believe it. I thought we were all too busy. They
Yeah.
started to change. We say birds don't fly because they're supposed to. Birds fly because they get to, man. They're birds. Like what? Like if you and I all of a sudden said, that's what those are, wings? Like that was just made my jacket fit weird. Like I'm out of here. Sorry, Jeff, gotta short the podcast on you. I'm flying. I didn't realize I could fly. When we start to believe our birthright and our identity and what God says is true of us, it starts to change everything. And all of a sudden we don't need all the traveling teams. Like, our kids were involved in everything, one thing at a time. Hey, what sport you want to do this year? Or this half of the year, or like, oh, you want to be in traveling band? Well, that we're not doing, then I guess what sport are we not? You know what I mean? Like we still did it all because we wanted those relationships.
Yeah.
But we weren't going to forsake our kids' salvation and identity and all that for a sport.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, your kid's not going to be Pele, sorry, they're not going to be Beckham. But even if they were, do you want their identity based on a sport or on Christ? You know what I mean? Like, so, but you can tell them that, but like, yeah, but I worship me. And when my kids worship me, because I say yes to everything and I drop everything for this, traveling, games and all, but I have no time for ministry or mission. That's an identity and gospel issue. It's really not a busyness issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm saying yes to this. I managed to talk my work into all of this because I want my kids to worship and love me, because that's where I find my identity and value.
Okay.
When that starts to shift and it comes from God consistently, you're like, you know what, kids, one thing at a time. We'll do it all, but you can't do it all at once. I might not make every game because there's some friends that we're going to hang out with tonight. Like, it's okay. We're not the worst parents in the world because so-and-so had to drop you off tonight and bring you home. But we're going to do it for them next Tuesday. I already talked about it with them. We're doing it,
Yeah.
but that stuff takes time and it takes intention to, from a gospel perspective, an identity perspective.
Yeah. I love that,
Otherwise, all
man.
the cool stuff just sounds like a new program to everybody. And
Sure.
they'll vote based on their American Dream Life calendar.
Hmm. No, I think that's completely right. And I think a lot of the assumptions that we have and presuppositions we have of what makes sense, what's best for me, what works, what's outlandish and not practical stands in the way of a lot of what God has for us and wants for us. Um, uh, and
Absolutely.
just like 2 or 3 minutes, if you could give us one practical step as we wrap up of what do you think a good first step for any youth workers who are thinking about this could launch? Is it like having a parent meeting and saying, here's the vision, what do you think? Is it going one family at a time? Is it going to your church leadership? What's like a good first practical step for youth workers thinking, how could I start this?
Great question. I think what I would do if I was like, okay, it's on, bro. Like, how are you going to help shift this? You know, like
Mm-hmm,
what I
mm-hmm.
would do, because it's all about becoming more and more like a family, because we are truly. So
Yeah.
I would probably host a meal for the parents, and I would try not to do it in the church building with a big plastic table and sporks. And, you know what I mean? I would try to like just get it in a house. And if you have to do two of them because you can't fit them all at once, or three of them or whatever, or get someone else in the church who's got a bigger house, you know, but do it in a home and have like, I really like give them plenty of time so that you get good attendance. It's not like, hey, next week, you know, like, hey, on this date, we really want to have a meal together as adults, you
Mm,
know, as parents, and just work on getting to know each other a little bit better. But we got a few cool things we want to let you know about, you know, have a meal and say, hey, da 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 da, and there, like, you know, there's ways to get to know each other real quick. Like we use these three questions. It's real fast though. We have time. We use these three questions to get to know people that you don't know that well. Is where were you born? Okay. Favorite childhood memory. Third question: what's the worst job you ever had? And we don't have everybody answer all three. You know, you go around, everybody answers the first one, and you're going to find all this commonality, and it's funny, and you're going to laugh your guts out at the worst job or favorite childhood memory, or oh, I love that too, you know, or whatever. Then you say, hey, we would love to have you start having a meal, you know, and maybe you start with monthly. First, you know, first week of the month, I want you to host a family dinner night for your kids and their friends.
mm-hmm.
And,
Okay.
there's no, here's the only ground rules: no shop talk, no trying to get anybody to say the Jesus in their heart prayer, you know, put on real music, like, you know what I mean, like it's cool, like, because it's high invitation but no challenge, you know. Like come
Mm-hmm.
on, you know. And I want you to start doing that once a month so the kids start to have fun and they don't have to feel weird, because it's like, oh, here's what's going to happen, or there's going to be about a 20-minute time we have to sit down and go around the room and say all this stuff, and then we're going to, you know, have to pray with our eyes closed. Like, don't, no, that's not what this is for. Do a family dinner night that's full of grace, full of fun, and just start doing that. And let's see what and then in a couple months we're going to get you all packed together for a meal, and we're going to see, what are you learning, what are you observing,
Okay. Yeah.
right? That becomes the model ultimately for what you could start to do. And once you build the trust, the kids love coming to this, it's super fun, then like it's no big deal, I promise you, to move into like doing the story of God, because you've been doing stories, you've been talking, you've been having a big dialogue around stuff, it's been fun. And people say, well,
Mm-hmm.
that sounds like a bait and switch. It's not. Kids flip out on the story because we all love story, you know, and
Yeah.
we've only done this a trillion times. So I can loan you some faith, but that'd be my first steps. Have a meal, not a meeting. And at that meal, have some fun, maybe use the three questions, you know, and then say, hey, we really love to do this. Who's up for that? You know,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe you've had some meetings. I like to do that with the key, you know, I need at least 6, you know, households that are willing to do this. I'm going to pre-meet with them over dinner, you know, like the weeks before. So when we all come together, we're like, we got a lot of, you know, a lot of social proof happening, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Okay.
would just start there. I think for most churches and their youth groups, if all of a sudden there was a fun family dinner night happening once a month,
Mm-hmm.
now you can do it once a week is what I'd love, but that might be a bridge too far at first. I think that would start to change the dynamic of how everybody interacted and who knew who, and
Mm.
it's safe. You're like, yeah, but you're not studying the Bible together. No, we're still doing that on Wednesday. It's all cool. But over time, we're going to move life into the rhythms.
Yeah.
Good rhythm is a consistent meal, because, you know, if you're really family, how often do you eat together? As often as you can. once a month, certainly not too much.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. Dude, this is great. I love it. This is a really good first launching step and dialogue. Let's get you back on soon to talk about those 6 rhythms.
love
That's
to.
awesome. In between now and then, where can people find you online, and what you do if they want to reach out to you?
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I'm here to help, and we've got so many resources. Anything I've mentioned, there's a ton of free resources. You can go to everydaydisciple.com. Okay, everyday disciple, just like that, all one word.com. And you'll find me there and a lot of resources. You can find the Story of God materials. Take a look at those. You can download free books, audio, videos. There's even some little courses if you want them. There's all kinds of stuff. And maybe even more importantly, is it's where the Everyday Disciple podcast, you can find it there. You can find it on Apple and Spotify and everywhere, but maybe you can figure it out there. And so, that's what it looks like. That's and it's the Everyday Disciple podcast. And we just had our 6-year anniversary.
All
And so
right.
every
Congrats.
Monday for 6 years, man, a lot of episodes. And we talk about all this kind of stuff from every perspective, living as a family on mission. How do you develop new leaders within church, be it youth or adults?
Mm,
How do you deal with your elders? How do you, live this out in the neighborhood? I mean, this week it's on race and identity and how that's all really a gospel issue. So
okay.
maybe we can talk about this differently.
Yeah.
So it's super practical, and it's kind of fun and easy, and it's about a half hour each episode or so Everyday Disciple podcast. I'd love it if they'd check that out and grab a bunch of free resources,
That's awesome. All right. We'll
and you can
do.
find me there. So
Yeah. That's the best part. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Caesar, and I'll be praying for you as you continue in your business and church endeavors for making the gospel known in people's lives and families and their communities. Thanks again, man.
Thanks, Jeff.
Well, that does it for today's podcast episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you haven't already, please like this video and subscribe to this YouTube channel so you can have a heads up about when we have new content. Also, if you ever listen to podcasts in the car or somewhere else, please follow us on your podcast player of choice. We are on every single one of them. If you haven't already, please check out our website, youthministrymaverick.com. There you can see a comprehensive list of our guests, their bio information, a list of ministries that can help you in your own ministry, some articles I've written, and a store where you can get some podcast merchandise. Also, we have a big ask. If you would go and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, not just a rating, but a review, take a screenshot of it and send it to me on social media. And in return, I will write you a thank you card and send you some podcast merchandise that you can't buy on the store. Well, that does it. We'll catch you next time. Adios.